Hello everyone, my name is Nomad and welcome back to another Borderlands 3 Moze build. Today I'm going to be talking to you guys through how to maximize your damage with Iron Bear through my Iron Giant build. And if you couldn't figure out by the name, this setup revolves around Moze's BFF, aka Iron Bear. Throughout the history of the game's balance, Iron Bear has gone through one of the greatest redemption arcs in anime history, going from basically worthless all the way up to surpassing the power of God himself. This build is a zero compromise, fully focused Iron Bear build, so we forget anything to do with helping Moze do damage, and just make sure that our chonky boy is doing as much damage as humanly possible. We achieve this result through a combination of a well-specced skill tree and leveraging shields, class mods, and grenades to boost our damage even further. As always, we start with the gear, and by gear, I mean the class mod, and by that, I mean class mods. Yes, plural. We use a flare class mod in conjunction with a flame class mod. I'll get into the reasoning in a little bit, but let's start with the flare class mod. What does it do? It's a DLC 4 class mod that boosts Moze's damage in all aspects: grenade, weapon, and most importantly for this build, action skill damage. While this bonus decreases the longer Iron Bear stays active, pretty much everything is dead before the diminished damage becomes noticeable anyway. As far as skill tree combinations go, we opt for 2 in Means of Destruction and 3 in Stainless Steel Bear. But in saying that, you guys might be thinking, but Noodmad, why don't we have 5 in Stainless Steel Bear? And to that, I say eat my... No, but really, ask Randy. For some reason, the flare can't actually roll with any more than 3 points in Stainless Steel Bear, so we're cursed with that for now. As far as passive stats on the class mod goes, we opt for splash damage and action skill damage. Now, as promised, I'll explain why we use 2 class mods for this build, and the reasoning is quite simple. I've put together a formula to explain. On a more serious note, the Flame class mod gives us a 15% chance to reset our action skill cooldown upon igniting an enemy. Through skills like Fire in the Skagden, Big Surplus, and just straight up using incendiary weapons, this basically becomes a guaranteed proc after a few shots with a high fire rate incendiary weapon. The rest of the stats for the Flame class mod, like skill distribution and passive stats, are meaningless, so no need to farm for a specific version of it. Any will do. So basically, become Pyromaniac, have Iron Bear. Forever. Stonks. There are a few other Iron Bear class mods out there, like Raging Bear, as well as Bear Trooper. But in all honesty, they're just sort of outclassed by the newer, more shinier options, i.e. Flame and Flare. In saying that though, Raging Bear can be used for a build focused on Iron Bear uptime, since the class mod's effect is reduced fuel drain per kill, but Iron Bear downtime is completely negated when we leverage our Flare/Flame combo, so Iron Bear uptime isn't a major consideration. In saying that though, the Bear Trooper class mod does have a valid use case and does enable you to have an Iron Bear that lasts an incredibly long time. However, most enemies are dead shortly after each encounter even starts due to the sheer power of Iron Bear, so once again, we just decide to focus on going absolute overkill with our damage at the cost of duration, since we mitigate virtually the only downside being cooldown through swapping to our Flame class mod. Now with class mods out of the way, let's talk shields. To be frank, there's a fair bit of variety in this area for Iron Bear builds. Some can have general purpose uses, and others can be quite specific and niche. As for general all-purpose shields, items like the Old God and the Plus Ultra are excellent choices. The Old God can roll with health parts that boosts Moze's health, and in turn, the amount of Iron Bear armor, since it scales accordingly. And the Plus Ultra can do the same, while also giving you action skill cooldown rate as a passive effect. The Old God drops from Eleanor Enhanced Desire from DLC 2, and the Plus Ultra Shield drops from DLC 4 from the always lovely Dr. Benedict in the Benediction of Pain. If you don't like farming, however, and want to get a somewhat min-maxed Iron Bear build without the mind-numbing grind, the Mendel's Multivitamin Shield is a solid alternative. It rolls with extra health parts by default, which is nice, so you aren't required to sacrifice your family to Cthulhu for good RNG part rolls. And it's a guaranteed side quest reward from the Holy Spirit's quest over on the Holy Builds testing ground of Athenas. And now, onto edge cases as promised to do as much damage as possible. We have a shield that can be used for doing as much damage as possible in a small burst of time. And for that, we have the Omnom, a melee 1 takedown drop from the Valkyrie squad. The 0.M is an amp shield with a twist. Upon shield break, it drops an end circle that boosts weapon damage, but also action skill damage. So you might have guessed already. Through leveraging the trigger shield break/fill effect on action skill start anoint, you can spawn an amp circle when spawning into Iron Bear to do some big damage. So yeah, that's about it. There really isn't much else as far as shields go, so let's jump over to grenades. Now, in order to pick the right grenade, we have to understand the theory behind the application of said grenade and what anoint we're going to use. We have technically 2 options. The standard and universally acceptable, even your grandmother won't be mad type choice, the damage on grenade throw anoint, which gives you you guessed it, a universal damage bonus to all facets of damage, including action skill, for a short time. Or the other alternative, more reliable and more sustainable Iron Bear anoint, the grenade spawn on hit anoint for grenades. The reason why we use this anoint is quite simple really. In Moses' Bear Mother tree, there's a skill called Biofuel, which gives healing upon doing incendiary damage. Through combining this skill, also like Skagdan, incendiary damage on splash, we can use grenades to heal Iron Bear during combat. That, my friends, is what we Indians should call a pro gamer move. Now, as far as actual grenades go, you want one that ideally homes on enemies and has multiple tri-grenade spawns. So, grenades like the cloning maddening tracker, as well as the hex grenade, works very nicely. The CMT can be obtained through vendor farming or world drops, both requiring you to give up your firstborn child to the Mayan god of harvest in order to have one drop in any reasonable time period, and the hex can be obtained from the sky bullies in the anvil on the tropical paradise of Eden 6. As far as prefixes go, we prefer Mervtacular or Recurring. Continuing the theme of min-maxing damage through less than practical ways, we can use the It's Piss grenade, a debuff grenade that makes enemies take extra damage from all sources. So, by chucking bottled piss at the enemy, and then immediately jumping into Iron Bear, we can fire off a couple shots to do some big damage. Get the It's Piss from Captain Thunk and Sloth in Conrad's Hold on Pandora. Throwing out grenades, we can now talk about artifacts. And in all honesty, artifacts are more or less worthless for Iron Bear builds. Outsupply to splash damage and actual skill cooldown, which is the only passive stat that actually boosts Iron Bear either directly or indirectly. Because of this, I prefer to use a Toboggan for its live move speed, as well as its amp damage, since I like to use launches and mows. More of a fun thing, not really practical for Iron Bear use cases anyway. Now, to talk about guns. There's a few requirements as to what sort of guns you can use, but I'll leave it up to you guys to choose whatever guns you enjoy, provided they fit the criteria I'm going to mention very soon. Requirement number 1 has to do splash or be incend. The reason why I recommend a splash weapon is to make use of Fire in the Skagdan, the skill that gives incendiary damage to splash, which we spoke about earlier in the video. The reason why it has to be incendiary is so we can make full use of the Flame Class 1 special effect in order to reset our Iron Bear cooldown, so we can get back into our 3-ton Tritanium Mech of Doom as quickly as possible. Requirement number 2 is the Anoint of Choice. Now, as this is an Iron Bear build, we're going to focus on anoints that will boost our Iron Bear damage as much as possible. And so for that, we're going to use the Iron Bear damage anoints, whether it be for Salamander, V35 grenades, railguns, and so on and so forth. Pick the anoint for the hard points that you think you will use the most. If you want optimal mobbing and bossing damage, I highly suggest snagging yourself the railgun damage anoint, as the capacitive armatures and corrosive saber rounds work great on the raid bosses as well as general mobbing alike. As for the guns itself, use whatever you prefer. I enjoy using the Plague Bearers, so that's what I tend to gravitate to. However, in the spirit of trying to squeeze out as much damage as possible from this Iron Bear build, if you want to, once again, go all in on the damage potential, 2 other guns can be recommended. Both are arms race exclusive and go by the names of the Boogeyman and the Dark Army respectively. The Boogeyman is a sniper rifle, with the special effect being that upon killing an enemy, it can spawn a spooky skull that can home in on enemies and do additional splash damage. The reason why it ties in nicely with an Iron Bear build is because this effect can be triggered by killing enemies while an Iron Bear, provided you are holding the Boogeyman in your hand when you jumped into Iron Bear. Another weapon that works quite synergistically with this build is the Dark Army, a TDR SMG that while holding it, spawns additional copies of the gun that float next to you and shoot whatever enemies you're shooting at. Much like the Boogeyman, this effect can be procced while an Iron Bear, so it can help proc experimental munitions, incendiary damage on critical hit, which in turn will trigger biofuel, which in turn will heal Iron Bear. You get the idea. Both of these guns are quite synergistic, and in the background gameplay, I'm using the Boogeyman. And now with all that gear out of the way, we could talk about the skill tree, finally. And in sticking with the theme of screwing Moze over in terms of damage to make sure we get Iron Bear to do as much damage as possible, we have 2 tree alternatives, depending on what hard points you want to run with. The first variation will have investment in Shield Retribution in order to gain access to the Railgun hardpoints, and the second alternative will have further investment in Purple Tree in order to get some extra Iron Bear damage skills at the cost of Railgun access. The second variation is more suited for those who exclusively want to use the miniguns and grenade launcher hardpoints, while the first variation is my personal favorite and best used for just wanting to do as much damage as possible for bossing and mobbing, once again mainly due to the strength of the railgun hardpoints. So let's cover off that variation first. In Bottomless Mags, we've invested down to Specialist Bear, and in doing so picked up Stoke the Embers, Scorching RPMs, as well as Specialist Bear, obviously, in order to boost our damage potential for Iron Bear. Redistribution and Russian Offensive were picked up as well, just to give on-foot Moze some extra survivability while we get Iron Bear back off cooldown. Moving to Demolition Woman, we spec down until Vampire and nothing more, since Iron Bear doesn't actually benefit from the short fuse skill. We have Skagdan, Torque Cross Motion, and Stainless Steel Bear to offer us some extra damage for Iron Bear, Means the destruction is there to help us regen grenades, so we can spam them once we exit Iron Bear to maximize the proc chances of the Flame class mod special effect. And we have a couple points of Vampire for survivability. However, if you still want to get short fuse, feel free to take a point out of Vampire and put it in that skill instead if you prefer to run a bit of a hybrid playstyle. In Shield of Retribution, we've invested enough points in order for us to get the Corrosive Saber hardpoint, so that means picking up Drowning in Brass, Experimental Munitions for damage, and a few burner points in Vlad of Ingenuity. Security Bear was also picked up just for that extra survivability and damage reduction for Iron Bear. In the Bear Mother tree, we've invested a lot in the tier 1 points, mainly to get some health regen from biofuel, extra incendiary damage through Big Surplus once Iron Bear is on cooldown, and some extra Iron Bear damage from really big guns. Now that's the first tree variation, and the second variation is slightly different in that we take out our Shield of Retribution investment and sink it further into Bear Mother instead. The other trees, blue and green, still remain the same however. For now, we've invested all the way down to superior firepower and feature creep in Bear Mother, which when combined gives us a hefty damage boost to Iron Bear. We also have some additional fuel skills in the form of Nitrogenanium engines and Never Going to Give You Up, which increases the potential duration of Iron Bear build. Now, this is the sort of combination where I suggest using a Raging Bear or Bear Trooper class mod if you want to run those class mods, since it synergizes nicely with this purple tree investment. And now, with the skill trees out of the way, let's go to quickly cover off how I play this build. So, in certain points in the background gameplay, you'll see that once Iron Bear has run out of fuel or is near running out of fuel, I swap to the Flame class mod in my inventory, and once I exit, I spam my Incendiary Plague Bearer and my Hex Grenade until my cooldown resets, at which point I re-equip my Flare class mod and jump back into Iron Bear. While this method of gameplay does require a little bit of inventory micromanagement, it does ensure you're squeezing out as much damage out of Iron Bear as possible. However, if you aren't a fan of this gameplay loop, feel free to equip a Raging Bear class mod or just run a Flare or Flame class mod without swapping, and that will still work fine since Iron Bear does a ridiculous amount of damage regardless. And with all that said and done, I think that about covers everything I wanted to talk about in this build. Hope you guys found it useful. As always, if you enjoyed this guide and are new to the channel, please just get a like in the video and subscribing to the channel too. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you guys next time. See ya.